Hello and welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to speak to you both. So, we were just having a bit of a chit chat before we got started and talking about all the exciting things that we're going to jump into. So, welcome. Thank you for being here with me today. I think the very first question I want to ask is, are we in a low vitamin D epidemic? Is everybody low in D these days? Because it seems like everybody and their dog and their cat and their parrots are all low in vitamin D. Isn't that right?
Thanks for having us on, Tara. Yeah, this is a topic we love to talk about. We have two episodes on our podcast,
Mhm.
Normal Curves, about this very topic because we couldn't fit it into one. And so the answer is no. Everybody is not low in vitamin D. And yet there is this whole narrative that's been around for 20, 25 years that everybody's low in vitamin D. And we can talk about where that narrative came from because it's
Yeah.
a fascinating medical detective backstory.
Well, that is exactly what I want to talk to you guys about because, I've been talking about this since 2021 and sort of, I don't remember what got me questioning it. And then a smart mentor of mine started to talk about it. And so I've been out there trying to sort of say to people, we might want to just cool it on the vitamin D. We might have it a little bit wrong. And I get crucified, right, online when I say that. Although the tide is slowly changing, there are now when I speak about it, there's more people who are more receptive. Some people agree. So I think that it's slowly changing. And what I was saying to you guys before was I love the Mark Twain quote, when you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And, because when everybody's saying this, I go, let's look the other way. So, let's start with like, what got you guys interested in vitamin D? Like, what piqued your curiosity or made you go, hang on, we might have this wrong?
So I've been following this story for a while, and I
Yeah.
use a lot of this in my teaching
Yeah.
because I think there was a study in Hawaiian surfers that came out in 2007, which is one of my favorite studies
Hmm.
because it's so crazy, where they were saying 50% of these Hawaiian surfers who were out in the sun an average of like 29 hours per week were, quote, low in vitamin D, which made great headlines, but also got my, spidey sense up.
Hmm.
Something seems wrong there.
Something seems a little wrong. And it's like we were speaking before about how I'm in Australia, right? But apparently us Australians are so deficient in D. It's just mind-boggling. So take it away. What happened? How did we get here?
Yeah, so the story goes back to there's a lot of elements to this
Uh-huh.
story. So I'll just sort of start with I started to do some research for the podcast looking back to the current or it's actually recently been reversed, and we're going to talk about that. But for a long time, if you look at your lab reports, they would say if you're below 30 nanograms per milliliter, you are insufficient in vitamin D. And if you're below 20 nanograms per milliliter, you are deficient. People
Mhm.
started using those boundaries, those cutoffs, in the mid 2000s, basically.
Mhm.
And so I just started to do some research on where did that come from? So I looked back before 2000, and it turns out that before the year 2000, people called under 10 nanograms per milliliter. That was deficient. And they didn't really call it, they didn't even have a category of insufficiency, but sometimes they called mild deficiency was under 12 or sometimes under 16.
Okay.
And so if you look back historically, it wasn't the case that everybody who's under 20 or 30 is low in vitamin D.
Yeah, right.
But there were a few papers that were published between 1998 and 2007, and they all share the same author.
Mhm.
And it really played an outside influence in all this. So we need to talk about him. His name is Michael Hollick. But those papers started arguing for pushing these boundaries, these cutoffs of what we define as low upwards. And that sort of ended up eventually with a medical body called the Endocrine Society publishing guidelines in 2011 that sort of codified this 20 and the 30. At the same time, there was another medical body
Mhm.
publishing countering guidelines saying, no, that's wrong. But the one that was more exciting was the one that, everybody's deficient. So that one got all the attention. Regina, do you want to say a little bit about Michael Hollick for us?
Well, first, I just want to point out I had mistakenly thought, oh, people somehow were not spending time in the sun, and that's why the population was
Yes.
getting more deficient.
Well,
That's
that's
what
what a
I
lot of
thought that
people
was
think.
about. And Kristen's work really opened my eyes and showed that no, the guidelines themselves changed. So we are artificially creating an epidemic. We can make an epidemic out of anything. We just need to change those guidelines. And once you do that, then it becomes a condition that you need to treat, that you need to do something about, when before it was not there. So I just wanted to point out that this, I think, is the most fascinating part of the study of the story, is how it's artificially changed.
Yes.
Michael,
Go ahead. Sorry.
so Michael Hollick is a researcher who has been behind a lot of these studies, and he is not free from conflict of interest.
Surprise, surprise.
Statisticians and podcasters like Kristin and me really want to look at conflicts of interest. Just because a researcher has a conflict of interest, or they stand to make money, or they're somehow involved in the outcome of their research, does not necessarily mean the research is bad. But a little like you were saying, it opens it up to more question and more scrutiny. And when you start scrutinizing what's going on behind the scenes with his work, then you see this alarming pattern of errors in his research.
Okay.
And this is the part of the episode I think is most fascinating, when Kristin was unraveling this bit by bit, showing this pattern over and over. Sloppy research.
Yeah, he's at Boston University and published two popular books, actually, that really are, the one is called The UV Advantage and the other one is The Vitamin D Solution. And these actually really help to drive this into the public consciousness, and probably physicians as well, right? People come in, they see these books, they ask their physician. And so that had a lot of influence. He also had a huge influence in the scientific literature. So we talk about in our podcast, he had a 2007 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine where he's the sole author, and there's really it's just him kind of going on about what he thinks. But it has 20,000 citations, which is an outsized number of citations. So again, he really helped drive this whole narrative that everybody's low in vitamin D. And we all need more vitamin D. And that's largely, he played a very big role in that. But other people have since found these conflicts of interest. It's been in, with the New York Times article, ProPublica. There's been some investigative journalism. Again, not to say, as Regina was saying, that I'm not sure that that's his motivation. He's, having listened to him on YouTube and things, he may just really, really believe vitamin D is everything. He started his research career in vitamin D, and so you can imagine. Oh, the funny line. You want to tell the funny thing, Regina, that we talk about that he thinks that vitamin D might have caused?
Extinction of dinosaurs.
Oh, really?
He
really.
Actually has put out there that
vitamin
he
D.
thinks that low vitamin D might have been the cause of the extinction of the dinosaurs. So
Listen,
when you're that caught
this
up.
is nuts. This is nuts. Like what I was saying before when we were speaking, like, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm no way a professor, but what I've learned about D, it just makes complete sense that it's nonsense that we're all deficient, let alone that it caused dinosaur extinction. That's just but how can very smart people, because most doctors, functionally minded, allopathically minded, we've got naturopaths, nutritionists, that's the world that I'm in. We're talking 9.5 times out of 10, they believe the narrative here. How could that possibly be? How come smart people haven't stopped to think? I guess it's just what happens sometimes. You can get swept up. And this is the danger, right? With misinformation, or when people parrot or believe what other people say without doing their own due diligence. But it's scary because everyone believes it. It's crazy.
A lot of what's happened with vitamin D is that because people have to publish, there's an opportunity to publish, right? If you make the bar higher and suddenly everybody's low in vitamin D, that makes very exciting publications, right? If you're like, oh, everybody's fine in vitamin D, that's not a very exciting study to publish, right? And then the other thing about vitamin D is we call it on our podcast a promiscuous variable because it is tangled up with so many other things. If you don't do a clinical trial, a randomized clinical trial, if you're just looking at how much vitamin D people have in their body, what we're testing even, right? You will see that vitamin D is associated with lots of good things. People who have high vitamin D tend to be healthier, right? Because how do you have high vitamin D? You go outside and exercise in the sun, your vitamin D is going to be high. You are healthy, maybe taking a multivitamin, have a healthy diet, your vitamin D is going to be high. You're obese, frail, old, a smoker, your vitamin D is going to be low. But that doesn't mean that the vitamin D caused those things. It's actually the reverse, right? You're unhealthy, you will have low vitamin D. You're healthy, you have high vitamin D. So we had so many studies, because again, researchers have to publish, saying, hey, if I look at vitamin D, it links to all these good things. And that's an exciting study, but that's observational research, and it's particularly fraught for a variable like vitamin D because it is so promiscuous.
Yeah, exactly. The observational data, that's very important. And so the observational data proves this association, right? But it doesn't prove that there's causation there. That's the big distinguishing feature. So there's a lot of people muddled up with if you have low D, you're more at risk for heart disease, cancer, or whatever. But that's not actually been shown in the research as far as I'm aware.
Not at all.
Right? So what's been shown, to your point, is yes, if you're an unhealthy individual, inflammation, dysbiosis, mineral deficiencies, not going out in the sunshine, maybe overweight, this can lead to low vitamin D. It's not the other way around. But again, it just blows my mind because this is not hard to tangle out and to tease out when you look into it. But I guess people just haven't done that due diligence.
I think it's also a very compelling story. All you need to do is go outside and get some sunshine. What could be wrong with that? Or you take a nice little pill, and this is it, right? A nice little vitamin. It's not even a vitamin; it's a hormone, right? But we call it a vitamin. What could be simpler than that? And I think we're very attracted to these easy, feel-good, quick fix stories.
Oh, yes, very much that pill for your ill approach, right? Because there's a lot of other things that can be low on blood work that we can't give a pill for. But I'm sure if we could, we would. And then that leads to very lazy practicing of medicine, right? This pill for your ill. Yeah, fascinating. I want you to dive deeper, if you don't mind, into that Hawaiian study. So I think we should, because it's such a great study, right? And it's just jaw-dropping when you really talk about it. So why don't we dive deeper into that? And then maybe we can kind of go back to the reference ranges a little bit more. And that's a big one. So
they've recently been reversed. So we got to talk about that.
But no one knows about that, do they?
No one knows.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the Hawaiian study, and then we'll go on to the reference ranges.
Yeah. So it was a small study, 93 people from a Hawaiian surf shop. Regina and I were saying, that's the kind of study we want to do in our careers, right? Go to Hawaii and do a study. And they asked them about their average sun exposure. It was like 29 hours per week. A lot of it was without sunscreen, getting plenty of sun. But they measured their vitamin D, standard blood test, what we measure in the standard blood test. And they found that half of them were below this 30 nanogram per milliliter range, which is now considered insufficient or mildly deficient, however you want to put it. And so they said, hey, look, half of surfers even are low in vitamin D. So look, we have an epidemic. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. And so instead of really saying, maybe the question should have been, perhaps we've got the reference range wrong.
Yes.
Perhaps we've got the reference range too high. If all of these healthy, because they were young people, they weren't unhealthy people, right? They didn't have diseases, right? So they were young, healthy surfers. But instead of saying we've got the reference range too high, they said, God, goodness, even surfers, young people, healthy people are deficient. That's nuts.
Well, they got 70,000 views on the journal website, which is a lot for a journal paper. So they got attention. Yeah.
See, it's so disappointing to the lay person out there who, doesn't understand the scientific world, that science can be compromised like this because it looks enticing. It's essentially clickbait in the science world, right?
scientists have to get published.
Yeah, that's very disappointing.
It is disappointing. Yeah.
What can you trust?
If you looked at the data in that one, there was none of them who were below 10 nanograms per milliliter. So if we'd used the old standard, none of them would have been considered deficient in vitamin D. Right?
And I think, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that you change the standard, and like Regina was saying, you can create an epidemic just by raising the bar, right? Yeah.
And I think I heard you say on your podcast that something like you have to be under 5 nanograms to actually have rickets or osteomalacia or
Osteomalacia.
Yeah. So that's kind of nuts, isn't it? Because most people would just be horrified if they were at 10, let alone knowing that you actually have to be under 5.
10 is probably a little low, but the point at which if you measure people with clinically overt osteomalacia or rickets, they tend to be under 5. Now, maybe there's some kind of, slightly soft bones in between 5 and 10 where you're not clinically, but you might be compromising your bone health, hence the, 10. But do you have to be up at 20? There's no evidence of that.
Yeah, right. Jeez. Okay. So why don't we talk about the reference ranges in a bit more detail?
Sure.
I'm just going to open up the floor to you. Go for it. Tell us, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back a little bit to Michael Hollick and say a little bit more about him because, again, other people have looked at his conflicts of interest. He also has a weird thing that has come up recently, which he has been defending child abusers, and it's gotten him into some trouble in Boston University. The connection being that he thinks that these kids have weak bones. And so it's not the parents, it's that they have a underlying fragility of bones, which has to do with vitamin D and this other syndrome called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that's gotten him in a bit of trouble because it's, obviously not right. So he's been defending child abusers, and that's gotten him some attention, negative attention in the media. What we looked at, which was different than other people I've looked at, is I started to actually fact check his popular books and his scientific papers. And there were a huge number of misleading, wrong statistics in that, which goes to credibility, right? He was taking things of his own studies and, using statistics that were wrong, but made it look more impressive. So there was a fun one where in his first paragraph of his book, it was his first or second book. I think it was the first one, the UV Advantage. He says, we did a study of, a random sample of people in Boston, and we found that 42% of them were vitamin D deficient. Now he's using this 20 nanograms per milliliter, which of course is inflated, but I was curious, like, okay, so who did you study? Was this a 10-person study? This is what a statistician asks. Was it 100 people? Like, who did you study? So I tried to pull the paper, and he mentioned it was in the Lancet. So I went to the Lancet. I tried to find this paper. I could not find a paper of his on a random sample of people in Boston. I finally found that there was one line in the Lancet paper where he mentioned that they had looked at some medical records of elderly women in their bone clinic and found that 42% of them were deficient in vitamin D.
Oh, you're kidding.
So it's like, that is totally misrepresenting your study.
Misleading.
Totally misleading. And yes, of course, elderly women with osteoporosis probably have lower vitamin D for many other reasons, not even just the osteoporosis, right? They're frail. They might not be going outdoors, right?
Yeah.
So we found just like statistic after statistic. Regina, you can tell our favorite one that we thought that was the funniest.
Up to 100% of Europeans are vitamin D deficient. Did I get that? Did I get that quote right?
Right.
Up to 100%. Potentially, he said every single person.
Every single European.
Yes. When you look at the data that he took that from, was it a representative sample of Europeans? It was not. How old were they, Kristin?
98 to 106.
No.
So his statistic was healthy adults, and he referenced this paper in centenarians, but they were all like, half of them couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And healthy, we thought, meant that they were still alive, still breathing. But we were just cracking up about that because up to 100, all of them were deficient because they were like, 98 to 106 in nursing homes and still alive, but
Yeah.
you would not expect them to have a high vitamin D. That population does not have vitamin D over 20 nanograms per milliliter. Sorry. Yeah.
You cannot use that to make a conclusion about anything.
No.
That's the point. This
Of
is misleading. So,
It
as
was just-
Kristin said, this points to his credibility. If you're that secure in your science, you don't need to hype it. You don't
Yeah.
need to shift it and
Yeah.
sell it like this.
No way. My goodness. So this Michael Hollett guy has a lot to answer for. Like a lot to answer
Yeah.
for.
And again, I've watched him talk on YouTube a lot now.
Uh-huh.
I would believe that he actually believes that
Really?
vitamin D
How
caused them.
could
Like,
you?
I really do. Like, we called it true believer bias on our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he really might believe this. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe he's motivated by the money and the fame or whatever, but there seems to be, that he's very earnest about, like, because he's worked on vitamin D his whole life. You can imagine, you work on this one little thing, you could see that's the clue to everything, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, this is the problem when you're fixated on one thing,
Yep.
whether it be vitamin D, whether it be gut health, whether it be hormones, whatever it is, you get
Yep.
pigeonholed. And I think it can be very dangerous because you don't see the body as a whole. But also if his whole body of work and like you said, the fame that's come from this, he can't just turn around and say, whoopsies, I was a little bit wrong. That would take a lot of, courage, and it would be very commendable. But I can see how perhaps he's built this career on quite a shaky foundation, but he can't backtrack on that because, wow, what a house of cards. How that would fall. Be crazy. But hopefully the work that we're doing, trying to get the message out there, will get people thinking a little bit more critically about this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was instrumental. He was the committee chair of the Endocrine Society guidelines that were released in 2011. So he had a lot to
really?
do with those guidelines. So it might be worth us talking a little bit about the two sets of guidelines
Please
that were
do.
allowed, were released in 2011, because there was one set of guidelines from the Institute of Medicine,
Yeah.
which is now National Academy of Medicine. They've since changed their name, but everybody still calls it the IOM report. And then the Endocrine Society in the same year released a report. They were conflicting. The Institute of Medicine actually came out and said, we don't think these cutoffs are correct, and we think we're overestimating how many people are low in vitamin D. They put that right out there. And then the Endocrine Society was like, nope, we think this is correct. And guess who got more attention?
Of course. And so what was some of I think people would love to understand, so what do you think the healthy range is? So that was back in, 2011, right?
2011, yep.
And then it's since been reversed, though. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So in 2024, so the Endocrine Society came under some fire. This group, they released a bunch of, you probably are familiar with doing perimenopause with right? They released a lot of clinical practice guidelines. The vitamin D one was one of them. They came under some fire in general a few years back because people realized that a lot of the authors on these guidelines had conflicts of interest that were directly related to the guidelines they were writing. There was also some concern about the evidence they were using. They were relying too much on observational data and not on high quality clinical trials, and we can talk about why clinical trials are so important. So they revamped their whole guideline process, and one of the first guidelines they redid was vitamin D.
Right.
And in that guideline, they reversed just almost everything from the 2011 guideline. And somehow, I don't know how the news media did not catch this, but they first of all said, we don't endorse the 20 nanograms and 30 nanograms per milliliters. We no longer endorse those as cutoffs for deficient and insufficient in vitamin D. Those things that are on our lab reports, they have been reversed. I don't even know, maybe the labs are still using them. Then they said we shouldn't be routinely testing people for vitamin D. If you're healthy and have no symptom, if you don't have symptoms of osteomalacia or something like that, you shouldn't be getting a test for vitamin D. And then finally, they said we shouldn't be routinely supplementing people. People should not be taking supplements unless a couple of groups, pregnant women, right, because of the risk of rickets. There were a few other groups like that. They said that, but everybody else, healthy, young people, non-pregnant, shouldn't be taking vitamin D. So it was a complete reversal. Yeah.
That's huge. They're saying people shouldn't be tested and shouldn't be taking supplements. But everybody's getting tested and everyone's taking a supplement.
Based on their 2011 paper, which now they've reversed, but nobody's gotten the message.
Yeah, it's crazy because honestly, like everybody who comes to see me, they're on a vitamin D supplement. And the whole reversal thing, we were speaking about this before. There's plenty of things in the scientific world that have been reversed, but it's funny how the first the first interpretation of the data is usually the one that sticks, right? And we see this in the hormone replacement therapy sector. You had the Women's Health Initiative. They said everybody should stop their hormones. You're all going to die, and that made wonderful headlines, right? So all the hormones were stopped, but then slowly all the authors walked back their claims, but that was never picked up in the media. It's awful because the first message is usually the one that will stick, but it's also the one that is more sensationalist as well, right?
Yes.
So like that plays a big role. Yeah. But I would think that it would be big news for them to pick up, oh, well, we were wrong. Like that's kind of big news. But again, we've talked about all the, other reasons why people don't want to do that. So what was I going to say? COVID and vitamin D, right? So this is why I get a lot of pushback. People say, oh, but we know from all the research that people who are low in D are at higher risk for poor COVID outcomes. And that may be true. But again, this boils down to that observational data, right? You're unhealthy to begin with. So you're low in D to begin with. So yes, you're going to have poor outcomes from COVID. And I think this is really important that people understand because they always point back to COVID and vitamin D.
Yeah, it's totally not true. There was a major randomized trial done in Britain where they randomized people to be tested. And if they were below this 30 mark, then they would get supplemented or you would get nothing. So it's a randomized trial, not blinded. And they were looking at respiratory illness and COVID. And of course, these results didn't come out until we were well into COVID because it takes a long time to do a randomized trial. But they found no improvements. No, you were not less likely to get respiratory illnesses or to get COVID. And so, no benefit at all from vitamin D, at least in prevention. This is in prevention of getting COVID. Bunch of studies out there on vitamin D were total fraud and crappy studies that I actually teach in my class with like made up nonsense. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. That's crazy, isn't it? And what about the VITAL study? Wasn't that randomized controlled trial done?
Fantastic study. Yeah.
Why don't you talk to that one?
Regina, you want to take that one?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
You remember all the details.
I might, yeah. Let's see if I can remember all the details. Yeah, it's a huge study run out of Harvard. I think it was 25,000. We kind of were fangirls of this study on our podcast because they set out to recruit 20,000 people and they got 25,000. And from a statistician's point of view, that just like warms our hearts. So it was randomly assigned. And this is the key to all of this because vitamin D is so tangled with everything else. The wonderful thing about vitamin D, though, in terms of studying it, is it's often very hard to do randomized trials, right? You can't get people to exercise or eat kale or whatever it might be. It's easy to raise people's vitamin D levels. We do know how to do that. You give them the pill. So we can easily see what happens if you raise people's vitamin D levels. So it's placebo-controlled, blinded, double-blinded. They had half on vitamin D, half not on, half on a placebo pill. They also had another, it was a cool trial because they also were looking at omega-3 fatty acids at the same time. So they used a cool statistical trick to look at that at the same time. But we didn't talk too much about those results. But the vitamin D, the main outcomes were in invasive cancer and major heart disease. So like you either had a heart attack or died of heart disease. And they found nothing. So you raise they were able to show we did raise people's vitamin D levels up to very high levels. They did no better than placebo on anything at all. There were a few minor, if you start digging around in the data, that, if you look at enough things like, oh, maybe in normal weight people there was something, or maybe in cancer mortality if we throw out the first 2 years of the data, right? But I would think that those are probably just little chance findings. And they were very good, at least in the paper, about saying you should take these with a grain of salt. Of course, the media picked those up, but
yes, because what I thought was they were saying if you supplement D, your chance of getting cancer or, yes, these cardiovascular events does not decrease, right? So
Yep.
desupplementation,
Correct.
not
Yep.
worth it. But I thought they said your risk of dying from cancer does go down. But you were just saying they
Okay,
kind of.
this is a great one to bring up because
Okay.
they said if we dumped the first 2 years of the data, saying maybe there's some kind of lag, which people do. This is what we call a post hoc analysis, though, not pre-planned. We're just
Okay.
looking to see, called exploratory. We
Okay.
dump the first 2 years of the data, and then we look at cancer mortality instead of incidence, which was not one of the primary outcomes. Then we see a benefit for vitamin D. The problem is you can start doing all of these. I'm going to look at only, people on Tuesdays and, people who drank coffee, and you're going to find something eventually. The interesting part of that one, the follow-up is there was a huge study done in Australia, actually, called the D Health Study,
Okay.
also a major randomized trial, vitamin D, placebo, well done. Their primary outcome was cancer mortality, and their other primary outcome was death. They found nothing. And then they said, but they came out after Vital. We saw that in Vital, they threw out the first 2 years of the data and looked at cancer mortality. So let's do that too and see what we find. Guess what they found? Opposite. The people on D had a higher mortality. Yep.
Oh, no.
Yep. Yep.
Oops.
So we think both of these were what we kind of borderline. They just made statistical significance. This kind of, the bar is not that high. So we would probably think that could be chance. It also could do with different dosages, but I suspect it's just a chance fluke because it went in the opposite directions. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. The moral of the story is we probably don't need to be taking vitamin D.
Yeah, unless you're in very special group, right? So you do work with pregnancy if you were never getting outdoors because of the risk of rickets, and elderly people are at risk of osteomalacia who never get outdoors, so never have any sun.
Yeah.
Right. Never get, and also malnourished often, right? If you're elderly and so there are certain groups that are at risk of osteomalacia, but other than those groups,
most people. So a couple of questions here. Do you know how much sun we need? Do we, because what I have seen in some of the research, and do correct me if I'm wrong, is that you don't need very much.
No, you're right.
Like, I don't know, is it 10, 15 minutes? Something like that?
It's less than that. Yeah. Less than that. Yes. There's one study that we didn't actually have time to talk about in the podcast. I don't remember all of the details, but depending on where you are, of course, it's different if you're in Boston in the winter take the Hawaiian surfers. Yeah. It's like 3 minutes. You have to be out in the sun. You've got your daily dose of vitamin D. Yeah.
3 minutes. My goodness.
So it's not even 10 minutes or whatever people say, you need to go out and get this. I need to go out and get my sun. Daily Sun. So I wrote for many years for Allure magazine, which is a beauty magazine. I wrote a lot about wrinkles and skin cancer. So you don't need you don't need to go out and deliberately get sun because we get it so passively. Wow. Again, might be a few groups where that's an exception. We did talk about a case study in the podcast where there was a male who never left his house and was vegan, and so he came down with osteomalacia. But very special groups, yes.
Well, that would make sense. That's just logic, right? That's what we can.
So it's not that there are groups that would need vitamin D supplements, but it's not.
Absolutely. But it's not the mass population. Yes, exactly. So that's kind of a bummer because I like to sit in the sun in summertime in Australia. Obviously I don't burn. I've always been a big proponent. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we get from the sun beyond D though, right? I don't know what all those things are, but the sun is very good for us within, reason. We never want to burn. And if we don't want wrinkles, then we have to be mindful. But, not getting sunlight, it never really sat well with me. It never sounded like a healthy way to live, is to just be fearful of the sun. There's a lot of people in Australia who are very fearful of the sun. And I see what they do to their children, full body suits, right? White sunscreen. They don't want a fingernail in that sunshine. And that makes no sense to me. And it's no way to live either.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably go overboard, although they probably will have healthier skin when they grow up. So I can't pull that off. If I could pull that off after writing for 10 years about wrinkles and the sun, I probably would do it. But I in my daily life do not have enough time. And my daughter is a swimmer. There is no way I can get that much sunscreen on her.
Yeah, no way. Now, question, do you know if we make vitamin D through our eyes? Have you ever?
I've never looked into that yet.
If you ever come across anything in your research, please let me know because I am sure I've heard it through the grapevine or I read it somewhere, but I don't have a reference.
I
So
mean, I
I'm
thought it
very
was just in the
curious.
skin, but I don't know. Maybe there's some type of skin in the eye. I don't know enough about the eyes.
All right, I want to
Yeah.
find that out because, right, in wintertime, you know, you're typically not exposing your body. But if you go out without sunglasses on, my thought was you could actually synthesize some through the eyes, but I don't know. So, yeah, if you
And,
find that
and
out,
ophthalmologists may not like that because I think the UV can be damaging for
that's
eyes, right?
true.
Yes. So,
That's true.
yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
And then, but I would assume though that can we store up vitamin D
Oh,
in the
yes.
summertime, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
Mhm.
And this is why some of these studies can be a little misleading. So one of the studies where we're talking about Michael Hollick, he did this study in med students and in doctors at his institution,
Mhm.
and he measured some of them in winter and some of them in summer. You store up in the summer your vitamin D, and then you eventually use it up. So if you measure people at the end of winter, they're going to look lower, but it's not necessarily a problem. But then he later cites, when we're talking about the miscitations, rather than citing the everybody at different times, the whole group, he cites only the ones who were measured at the end of winter. But he doesn't say these were the ones measured at the end of winter. It's just like 32% of these healthy med students were low in vitamin D, but that was only the group that was measured at the end of winter when they were depleted of their vitamin D source. You absolutely, it's fat soluble. You can store it up, which is why it can be toxic too, because you can store it. Yeah.
So misleading. And so then with the toxicity, do you want to talk at all about supplementation? What could occur? Like what are the risks when people aren't deficient, but they're looking at this one number on a piece of paper? And what I say is that, they're trying to, or their doctors are trying to bully or strong arm that number, right? It's like, let's get that number up, maybe even against what the body is potentially trying to do on its own. It has its own regulatory mechanisms with D. So, what are the consequences from taking vitamin D supplements if you don't need them?
It hasn't been well studied. I mean, Regina, what was yours that we talked about on the podcast? At one point, you had a vitamin D. It was 91.
Oh, yes, I heard that.
Yes.
Holy.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm never going to
Yes.
let you live that down.
No.
Yes, but
It's back down.
nothing bad happened to you. So I presume that, I don't. There's not a lot of research at
Okay.
these kind of physiologically high levels that
Sure.
people are achieving now
Mhm.
to say, it's 70, 90, is that too high? You can have very toxic, right, at very extreme levels, which unfortunately, because people are being extreme, has occurred. They're rare enough that they tend to get case reports in the literature, which means that, right, that they don't happen often enough. But I think the one we talked about, the boy was vomiting, had kidney failure because his mother accidentally gave him too much. Sometimes bottles aren't labeled, right?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, one thing that we haven't really sort of deduced down is, and I don't know if you I think you talk about bioindividuality, right? So when it comes to a reference range,
Oh, yeah.
what do we want to aim for? Because I know we've got Quest Diagnostics in the States saying upwards of 100, right?
Yeah. Yep.
We've got McCullough saying 60 to 80, I think. We've even got Huberman and
Oh,
the,
yes. We quoted him. We picked on him on our podcast. Yes.
Yes, I was a little bit interested when I dove into the research on cold plungers and some of his understandings on cold plungers. Anyway, I'm no Huberman, but his reference ranges, I think he says up to 60, does he? I can't.
All I know, we quoted that he had a whole podcast on vitamin D where he was saying 70% of Americans have inadequate vitamin D. So we picked on that in our podcast because one, that requires these very, using this high bar. And two, even if you use the 30 nanograms per milliliter, it's not 70%. It's actually 60%. So I was picking on his statistics a little. Yeah.
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 So talk to me. What do we want to think when it comes to reference ranges? If we are testing, even though we have established we probably don't need to test, if we are testing and we're looking at this reference range, where do we want to land?
Regina, you want to talk about the IOM's recommendations on this? This gets into a little fun statistics.
I'm sorry, I forgot the details in the IOM.
The
have to
normal
take it.
curves. So
Yes.
our podcast is called Normal Curves, and we were talking about the IOM, the Institute of Medicine when they put out their report in 2011, they were very careful to say there isn't just one bar, right? So this gets to the individuality, right? That, you hit 20 and you below 20 and whoops, you're deficient. Whoop, everything, you're going to fall apart. So they were talking about there being a distribution of needs. So Regina might need more vitamin D than I do, or or vice versa, right? And so they were talking about that distribution follows a normal distribution. And I mean, they're assuming it follows a normal distribution, but that's often a reasonable assumption. And their target, I think they had that like most people are okay at, say, it was 16 nanograms per milliliter. That's the average
16.
need in the population. Yep. And then the standard deviation was 2. So that means if you go out 2 standard deviations up and down on a normal curve, they were basically saying if you're down to the kind of normal need range is 12 to 20, but the 20 doesn't mean that's the very, very, very high. The people who have the highest need in the population are up at 20. Okay. So that doesn't mean everybody has to be at 20, right? So most people are fine around 16, 18, right? And some people are even fine at 14 and all the way down to 12. And this goes back to what they had said before, 2000, that 10 was if you're below 10, you're probably too low. Well, that's the very tail end of that normal curve, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's going to really open up some eyes, I think, to hear that. Okay. Well, how about we sum this up? If you had a megaphone and you could just speak to the medical community, right? What is the biggest message that you just want to get out there right now? I guess, we've talked about it, but what would you say?
It's an interesting one because in one of the newspaper articles, one of the quotes is they're talking to a physician, and the physician it's about the VITAL study and with negative results. And the physician says, well, but, I don't want to stop giving my patients vitamin D just in case. There's this idea of there's just in case it does something maybe I'm half convinced by the study, but just in case I'm still going to give it. So it is the habit, right? That you're so used to giving it, you're afraid not to anymore. Yeah. So my take home here would be to read the new guidelines from the Endocrine Society and realize that this is the body that established this whole epidemic. And they just said there is no epidemic. You have to read carefully because they were a little subtle in their reversal. They didn't come out and say, wow, we were wrong for obvious reasons, but it's in there. And it literally is a reversal. And I think it didn't get picked up so much by the media because they did try to hide it a little to not want to admit error, I think. But just realize that the body that established this whole epidemic, they just said they were wrong.
Yeah.
That's my take home. Yeah.
No, thank you. Where can everybody find you both?
Normalcurves.com.
That's your website. And then that's the name of your podcast as well, isn't it? Normal Curves.
Fantastic. Gina, you want to say a little bit about what we're doing on our podcast?
Please do.
Our tagline is sexy science, serious statistics. Awesome. And Kristin wrote for Beauty Magazine, as she had mentioned, and I wrote about dating and relationships and sexual health for Los Angeles Times. And so we have in our journalism background a lot of stories and studies that we covered, and we didn't have a chance to really go in depth when we will write about them as journalists. But now we have the ability to go through and really dig into the research and, find interesting things. We've talked about, does wearing red make you look sexier? Hookworm therapy for prediabetes, a whole range of just fun, interesting things where we dig into the research and help people become critical consumers of the research as well.
I love it. Does wearing red make me look sexier?
Maybe.
What a black and white answer.
We end every episode with a 1 to 5 rating of the strength of the evidence for the claim. So they're definitely trying to say that, sometimes there's uncertainty and we don't know for sure. That one we gave fairly high number ratings to that. There's probably something there, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Okay, cool.
It does not work for everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're already young and beautiful, then it does make you look sexier, which I feel like, is
Not
very
as helpful post-menopause.
Not fair. Right.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you both being here, and it's been a wonderful conversation, and hopefully this gets spread out far and wide, and hopefully you continue to speak about this and get on more podcasts, because it's an important one. We've really I'm a bit of a truth seeker myself, and so I really appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us on here. And I will say we have 2 episodes. If you want the even longer version on vitamin D on our website at normalcurves.com, so you can hear even more of the backstory. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
I will definitely link to everything in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Thanks.